Hey guys, welcome back to NerdCrave. I want to do something a little bit different today. I've had people ask me, what does my audiobook library look like? How many audiobooks do I have? Because I'm really passionate about audiobooks, particularly. I used to be a huge reader. Now I'm a pretty huge audiobook consumer, if you will. So where did I start with audiobooks? Well, honestly, I started by pirating some audiobooks way back in the day, some bootlegs, and I also started buying like physical audiobooks on CDs at the same time. Now I've moved over to Audible just because Audible is not only is it a legitimate way to own things and give credit to the authors, but it's also really convenient having everything all in one app. Um, when you download, even if you have a legitimate downloaded copy of an audiobook, you have to play it through some kind of music player. And there's always problems with skipping, losing your spot, or moving back to play music in your music player and, forgetting where you left off. So it's really nice to have a standalone app that just manages your audiobooks, and Audible does a really good job of that. So I thought I'd show you a little bit about what's in my library. Now, this is stuff that I've mostly acquired over the last, let's say, 3 years, give or take. I've got about 70, 75 books altogether. So just starting at the most recent here, uh, Insurgent, one of the Divergent books that my daughter got. I haven't read that yet. I probably won't. I watched the movies and I'm happy with that. This is here, Marvel Comics The Untold Story is a book that I'm about to get into here in the next week or two, and that's something I'm going to be reviewing on my channel. Ready Player One, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the movie. I wonder how many of you have read the book, because the book is fantastic. It's a lot different than the movie. The movie focuses on a lot more recognizable icons from gaming. Ready Player One is the book focuses on a lot of obscure 80s and sometimes even 60s and 70s stuff. It's an absolute nerd fest and it should not be missed. I'm going to be reviewing this on my channel probably in the next video or two. A couple little things. I've been working my way through the Robert Ludlum's Covert 1 series. These books are getting worse and worse as they go. The first two or three were pretty good, but they're not actually written by Robert Ludlum. They're written by various ghost authors, and they're definitely going down in quality as they carry on. Console Wars, I just reviewed on my channel, my last video. If you haven't seen that review, go look for it because I've got a whole bunch of guest appearances by several of my favorite YouTubers on there. It's a really interesting video. 5 Feet Apart, that's another one of my daughter's books. I may actually listen to that at some point. It does sound like a nice, heartwarming story. Indian Horse here is something I picked up for free off Audible. I recently, after watching the Jack Ryan TV show on Amazon, I started getting into the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan novels. It was a bit of an adjustment going back to 80s spy novels. At this stage in the game, you're so used to hearing things about, Muslim terrorists and things like that. It's really kind of a culture shock to go back to thinking of Russia as the big scary enemy. And as all these were based in the 80s, the Jack Ryan books tend to be pretty heavily Russia and Soviet Union based in terms of the conflicts. At least in the first 3 or 4 books that I've read, The Hunt for Red October was fantastic. Moving into Wheel of Time, I know a lot of people have various opinions about Wheel of Time, but it is one of the biggest, best fantasy novels or fantasy series of all time. I have these already as digital downloads that I pirated, but I wanted to get legitimate copies, so I started about the 8th book out of, I think there's 15 books in the series. So I've got 3 here: Crossroads of Twilight, Winter's Heart, Path of Daggers. I'm working my way through those because I haven't gone to the end of that series yet. So I started around the 8th book now, and I'm going a book at a time. Here's another Jack Ryan book, Red Rabbit. Moscow Vector's another one of the Covert 1 novels. That one wasn't bad. Here's an interesting book that I am going to be reviewing very soon. I read this about 6 months ago. That's Superman, The High-Flying History of America's Most Enduring Hero by Larry Tye. This is a fantastic nonfiction book that follows the history of the character Superman and his creators and all of the business interests like DC Comics, the early history of DC Comics, and all of the characters behind that. It's an absolutely fascinating book, and I will be reviewing that in more depth coming soon. Here's another Covert One novel, Lazarus Vendetta. Now, here's something that I have a really soft spot for. This is one of the first audiobooks that I ever listened to. Not this one in particularly, but a book by Nelson DeMille called The Lion's Game. This is one in the series of the John Corey novels. This is book 3, Nightfall. I got some classic literature here, Rudyard Kipling collection, Jungle Book, and that sort of thing. The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which I have not listened to completely. I listened to the first maybe 2 hours of it and then kind of got distracted, if you will. Here's another one I haven't listened to yet, but I am going to listen to fairly shortly. I've just started to get into John Scalzi. He's done some pretty interesting stuff, and it seems like most of his books are narrated by Will Wheaton, who's a absolute nerd icon, and I love him as a narrator. So I will be getting into those fairly soon. Foundation by Isaac Asimov. If you like science fiction and you haven't read this book, this is literally one of the top 2 or 3 best science fiction books of all time. And it's read by Scott Brick, who's an absolute legend in the audiobook circles. Let's see what we have on page 2 here. So here's another Nelson DeMille, John Corey. Again, this is read by Scott Brick as well, Plum Island. That's actually the first book in the series. We've got another Jack Ryan book, Patriot Games. That one was pretty good too. Jurassic Park: The Lost World. I also have the first Jurassic Park book, and they are also read by Scott Brick. And let me tell you, if you're a fan of the movies and you haven't read the books, stop what you're doing and go read Jurassic Park and The Lost World, because these books are fantastic, and they're so much more in-depth than the movies, and there's actually quite a few key differences that they really took liberties with in the movies. Wildfire, Nelson DeMille, that's another one of the John Corey books, book 4. Now, something else I really got into was the Star Wars books, particularly the ones by Timothy Zahn, the Thrawn books. Now, this is one of the second trilogy, the Spectre, the Hand of Thrawn. I've got quite a few of those. Battlefield Earth, L. Ron Hubbard. Whatever you think of L. Ron Hubbard's politics and Scientology, this is a fantastic book. Now, unfortunately, this particular version of Battlefield Earth has a different set of narrators. It's got a whole bunch of different narrators, like a cast, but it's not as good as the one that was done in, I guess, the 80s or early 90s. I have a bootleg of this one, and I feel like the narrating was way better in the older version. So I haven't listened to this version all the way through yet. I do plan to force myself at some point, but I just prefer the older bootleg version. Here's another Covert One novel, The Altman Code and The Paris Option. Those are both Covert One books. Now here's another nonfiction book, Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby is a character that I'm really fascinated with. I grew up watching a lot of Bing Crosby movies with my grandmother and my mother, and he's just a really fascinating character. So this is kind of like a biography of his life. So I have listened to about half the book and then got distracted. This here is really interesting, and you may not have known that Audible has this kind of thing for sale, but they have a lot of radio dramas, the old radio dramas from the 40s, 50s, 60s. They've got quite a bit of different stuff, but I actually got I believe this one was made in the 70s, the Foundation Trilogy. The Foundation Trilogy radio drama, which is a series of episodes. I'm not sure how many episodes it is, but it's about 5, 6, 7, 8 hours long altogether. And they're really well done. It really reminds you of a different time. And they've unfortunately not really restored the audio very well, so the audio is a bit echoey and whatever, but you can't really argue with that kind of experience. It's something you have to experience at least once. Now, here's another book I will be reviewing fairly shortly, and this is a really important book in pop culture. I Am Spock by Leonard Nimoy. Decades before, he had written a book called I Am Not Spock, in response to being annoyed at all of the fans who only saw him as this one-dimensional Spock character. now he's coming back. I guess it was 20 years ago when he wrote this book too, but he's coming back and saying, you know what, I am Spock, and he talks about his whole journey through Star Trek, tons of Star Trek history, backroom drama, all kinds of stuff about the writers, the directors. It's a really fascinating book, and I will be covering a full review of that at some point here soon. If you're not familiar with Anne of Green Gables, it's a Canadian story by Lucy Maud Montgomery. There's several books in the series. Um, it's not really a guy book, but as a Canadian, it's kind of an iconic thing that you just kind of have to consume at least once. And this one was read by Rachel McAdams, and she did a fantastic job. This one here I got for free, and it's actually fantastic. I got it for free at Christmas time. It's a Christmas Carol. Um, Obviously, Charles Dickens, but I listen to this every Christmas. It's only about maybe 4 hours, 5 hours long, and it's really enjoyable. It's well done. It's kind of dramatized. Here we move into The Diamond Throne. This is David Eddings. I've read a ton of David Eddings' books, the physical books. I decided to pick these up just to give them a try. I haven't got into them yet. There's 3 books in this Elenium series about the Knight Sparhawk, and kind of it's an interesting fantasy series. You should probably read if you're into fantasy. Um, Here's some more of the Star Wars books, the early Thrawn trilogy, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. These are really good. They're fully dramatized. There's sound effects, music, multiple voice actors. They're really fantastic, and the Thrawn trilogy is one of the highest rated of the Star Wars book series, the expanded universe. This I haven't checked out yet. This Galaxy Outlaws, it's apparently uh, quite long. I don't know much about it. It was like an indie author or something. I picked it up really cheap. I'm gonna check it out at some point. Here's the first book in the Thrawn trilogy, Star Wars: Heir to the Empire. This book, Wraith, is kind of interesting. I got it kind of on a whim because it was like $4 or something like that. I listened to about half of it and then got distracted, but I do intend to go back to it, and I think my daughter's going to listen to it pretty soon. And then the big mamma jamma here, The Stand by Stephen King. I'm not a big Stephen King. I won't say I'm not a fan. I just haven't read a lot of Stephen King stuff, and this is actually the first Stephen King audiobook that I ever listened to, and this book was impressive. Ridiculously long because this is the extended version or whatever. This book is like, I don't know, 50 hours long or something, but it's an impressive book. It's fantastic, fantastically written. Um, Great characters. Absolutely love the book. And if you're into science fiction, this is not really a horror per se, it's more of a science fiction. All right, let's get into some more favorites here. Raymond Feist. So this is a series, the Rift War cycle. This is book 3 and 4. But the Rift War cycle is a really good fantasy series from the late 80s, early 90s, I guess. Rama. This is Arthur C. Clarke. There's 4 books in this series. Uh, Really epic sci-fi, fantastic, story of people going through a generations-long quest into the stars. It's absolutely fantastic. Here we have, I got this. I love the Narnia books. This is the 7th book in the Narnia series, The Last Battle. The reason why I got this is because it's narrated by Patrick Stewart. I would like to have all the Narnia books at some point, but I do have bootlegs of them, so I'm not in any hurry. But this one is read by Patrick Stewart, and it's really fantastic, so I snapped that up. This Harry Potter History of Magic is a non-fiction book narrated by Natalie Dormer from Game of Thrones. I thought this was something I would like, but I'm not really interested in it. I'm actually thinking of returning this book and getting something else. So here's the other Rama books. So Rendezvous with Rama, Rama 2, and The Garden of Rama. Fantastic books. If you haven't read them and you're into science fiction, you owe it to yourself. Here we have the Sherlock Holmes collection, all of the major Sherlock Holmes books, read by Stephen Fry. He's an absolutely fantastic narrator. I mentioned Jurassic Park. Here's the other Michael Crichton Jurassic Park novel, which you really should read. Here we've got the Cassandra Compact. That is another of the Covert 1 series, and actually one of the good ones. That's book 2. Book 1, 2, 3, 4, they're all pretty good. Here's another one of the Raymond Feist Rift War books, Magician Master. This is a standalone Raymond Feist book, Fairy Tale. And if you're into dark fantasy horror, I would really suggest this book. It's twisted in all the right ways. Um, if you can find this book, cheap somewhere, or if you want to get the audiobook, I would highly recommend it. It's absolutely gripping. And then another standalone book. This is by Simon R. Green, Shadows Fall. This book is bizarre. I can't even describe it, but I've read this book probably 10 times because it's so fantastical. The this guy, I can't even describe it. He goes into like a this town of Shadows Fall is in like an alternate dimension, or it's like hidden from view, and all of the all of the things that you wouldn't expect in the real world, from elves and trolls and things like that, are in there, but also dead people and gods. And it's bizarre, but it's really well done. Moving right along here, there was the other Rift War book, Magician Apprentice. Now, this is the John Carter Princess of Mars, the whole Barsoom series from Edgar Rice Burroughs. So there's several books in this series, and this is narrated by Scott Brick. Now, anything narrated by Scott Brick is an instant win for me. He's fantastic. Here's another Nelson DeMille book, Radiant Angel. That's book 7 in the John Corey series. The Hades Factor, book 1 in the Covert 1 series. Again, if you like spy stuff, these are kind of popcorn books, but the first 2 or 3, 4 were really good. Here we go, Nelson DeMille, The Panther. That's the follow-up to one of the follow-up books to The Lion's Game there in that series. Then we move into Stephen Lawhead. This is an author I really loved when I was an early teen. He does a lot of, British history novels, if you will, focusing on, Arthurian legends and that sort of thing. This series here actually focuses on the Robin Hood storyline, but he kind of makes it his own, and there's 3 books in the series. This is the 3rd one, Tuck. And then Scarlet is the 2nd book in that King Raven trilogy, and Hood is the 1st one. Interesting books. He's a really good author, but he really dives deep into, ancient, British history. So here's Nelson DeMille, The Lion. Great book. Frank Peretti, kind of a religious overtone book, but The Oath, fantastic book. John Scalzi, Agent to the Stars. Nelson DeMille, The Lion's Game. This is probably the first audiobook that I ever read as an adult. Probably about 2006 or 2008 when I started getting into audiobooks, and it is fantastic. It was a great first book. So that actually brings us to the end of the list. The list was chronological roughly as to the order which that I bought the books. So you can see The Lion's Game here is the first book that I bought when I got my Audible account, and I haven't looked back. So thanks, guys, for sticking around. You may not have made it through the whole video, but if you did, thank you. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay classy.